Hola, bona tarda a tothom, a tots i a totes. Així estem Justin O'Connor i Pau Rausell. Com que no tenim presentador oficial, el que farem és autopresentar-nos. I per a no cometre errors, jo em presentaré a mi mateixa i Justin es presentarà a ell mateixa. El meu nom, jo soc Pau Rausell, soc professor del Departament d'Economia Aplicada de la Universitat de València i des de fa 25 anys dirigeix una xarxa, una àrea d'investigació, de recerca en l'àmbit de l'economia de la cultura i crec que per això ens han cridat. Cal dir que fa 25 anys no ens feia cas ningú i que hem estat alguns anys de travessera pel desert, però que avui en dia crec que gràcies en part també a la nostra aportació en l'àmbit del coneixement, hi ha molts altres més, molts dels quals estan ací en aquesta sala, hem ficat o hem ubicat l'agenda, en el centre de l'agenda, el paper de la cultura en l'àmbit social i econòmic. Per tant, jo crec que és una batalla guanyada, vull dir, avui en dia, comparat amb fa 25 anys, la cultura s'incorpora a l'agenda política, social i econòmica i, per tant, jo crec que ahí tenim la batalla guanyada, encara que n'hi ha encara moltes coses per fer i per avançar. L'objecte de la conversa d'avui era parlar sobre el valor social de la cultura. Jo crec que la intenció dels organitzadors era presentar a Justin com el defensor de l'afirmació que la cultura no és una indústria i crec que a mi em toca el paper del liberal. No ho sé molt bé, però tractarem de... La mecànica va ser, jo vaig a fer una xicoteta introducció, una petita introducció de 5-10 minuts al voltant de quina és la meva posició en l'àmbit de la generació de valor en la cultura i després parlarà Justin 10 minuts també i després provarem de fer interactuar entre els dos al voltant de les nostres presentacions i si de cas a última hora donarem pas a l'audiència per si podem també ampliar el diàleg. El que es tracta és de fer un diàleg. Per tant, vaig a començar jo. La veritat és que no estic molt còmode perquè la llum és molt forta. Vaig a posar-me plantat, si no n'hi ha problema. Bé, quina és la meva posició al voltant dels processos de valoració de la cultura? Aquest és un treball molt recent que estem fent per a la Comissió Europea, molt preocupada en aquests moments sobre el paper que pot jugar la cultura en l'àmbit de la competitivitat, la bruixola de la competitivitat. I hem estat reflexionant al voltant de quines característiques tenen els béns i els serveis culturals i, per tant, parlem de totes les coses que se'n parlen sobre què és la cultura. Hem recuperat un concepte que jo crec que és un concepte interessant, és el concepte de l'excepció cultural. És un concepte que apareix a mitjans dels anys 90, quan estem en les negociacions al voltant del procés de globalització en el GATT, en l'organització que en aquell moment regulava el comerç internacional i liderats per França, així van dir no, quan parlem dels serveis i els béns, la cultura és excepcional, hem de tractar-la d'una manera distinta. I jo crec que aquest concepte d'excepcionalitat és un concepte que es pot recuperar. Es pot recuperar perquè excepcionalitat vol dir que considerem l'excepcionalitat és una decisió política, és una decisió d'una comunitat que considera que la cultura és excepcional, que no pot ser tractada de la mateixa manera que altres béns i serveis. El terme en el que estem utilitzant últimament és a veure si la cultura és un bé públic o no és un bé públic. Clar, a mi així em xirria una miqueta les orelles com a economista, perquè al final bé públic en el llenguatge quotidià a vegades és un terme que té a veure més amb aspectes, podríem dir, morals, si és un bé públic, si cobreix algun servei públic. Des del punt de vista econòmic, la determinació d'un bé públic és molt tècnica, té unes característiques determinades, que és consum no rival, té una sèrie de criteris que si hem de pensar en la cultura en sentit antropològic, en sentit ample, podria complir els béns o serveis culturals, podria complir la descripció de bé públic. Però si agafem un llibre de poesia, és un bé privat. Des del punt de vista de la tècnica de l'anàlisi econòmic, és difícil determinar que un llibre de poesia és un bé públic, és un bé privat que pot tindre un preu, no se'l poden regalar, però pot tindre un preu i és perfectament, tècnicament, és un bé privat. Parlem també de béns comuns. Efectivament, la cultura en alguns casos té característiques de béns comuns i compleix una funció que sols permet que la gestió d'aquests béns comuns siguin de manera, podríem dir, mancomunada. N'hi ha un altre concepte que és el concepte de béns preferents o merit goods. Què volen dir els mèrits preferents des de la perspectiva de l'economia? Són béns que en conjunt, de nou, des d'una valoració política i moral, pensem que la gent consumeix poc. És a dir, haurien de consumir més. Haurien de demandar més. No els demanden per diverses raons, però en conjunt la societat considerem de manera col·lectiva que haurien de demanar-se més. I per tant, no es comporten perfectament com un bé privat en el mercat. I després parlem d'externalitats, positives o negatives. Externalitats són estos efectes que tenen l'intercanvi de béns culturals que no s'apropien en el procés d'intercanvi, que no s'apropien per la via normal del mercat, que hi ha altres agents que se'ls apropien de distintes vies i de distintes maneres. Un festival genera valor, efectes externs que se'ls apropien l'hostaleria. Aquests valors i aquests valors econòmics en termes d'externalitats, perquè generen demanda externa. I parlem també dels efectes que tenen els béns culturals en el conjunt de la societat. És a dir, així n'hi ha un mare magnum de conceptes que efectivament cal profunditzar, però jo vull assenyalar que el nostre model és dir, el valor intrínsec de la cultura és satisfer els drets culturals. L'objectiu de la política cultural és satisfer els drets culturals. Com l'objectiu de la política sanitària és millorar la sanitat. L'objectiu de la política cultural no és millorar el funcionament del sector cultural. Això és un instrument. L'instrument, ens fa falta un sector cultural molt sòlid, robust, per a satisfer els drets culturals, però l'objectiu és satisfer els drets culturals, no que funcioni bé el sector cultural. De manera que de la política sanitària l'objectiu és millorar la salut dels ciutadans, no que funcionin bé els hospitals. És un requisit imprescindible, però l'objectiu no és que funcionin bé els hospitals, és millorar la salut dels ciutadans. En aquest sentit, n'hi ha que entendre-ho. I quina és la perspectiva? La nostra perspectiva, en part també compartida per la recent llei de drets culturals. Els drets culturals són el dret a construir la teva pròpia identitat, el dret a participar i accedir i el dret, que a vegades no el remarquem suficientment, el dret a gaudir de la cultura, el dret al plaer. Això a vegades, de les polítiques culturals sempre és molt monacal. Gaudir i per tant tindre plaer és també un dret cultural, és part dels drets culturals. Quan nosaltres intentem d'entendre quins són els processos, el problema és que les activitats culturals, que ja dic des de la perspectiva pública i per tant en tots aquests conceptes de béns comuns, béns públics, béns de mèrit, etc., l'objectiu és satisfer els drets culturals. El problema de la política cultural és que pot ser ferramenta, pot ser instrument per a moltíssimes altres coses. Nosaltres diguem moltes vegades que la cultura és un antibiòtic d'ampli espectre, ens aprofita per a tot, ens pot aprofitar per a tot. I per tant, tot el que fem a partir d'aquest moment tots els impactes que tenen la cultura que generen valor social, valor econòmic, valor ambiental. Tractem d'entendre com se generen, però tots aquests processos són instrumentals. És a dir, però està bé. No sé si per sort o per desgràcia això li dona complexitat a les polítiques culturals, però ens obliga a intentar identificar quines són les trajectòries des de l'experiència cultural com a economista. Jo partís de cert individualisme metodològic i vol dir que analitza l'experiència cultural dels individus, l'agregació d'aquests individus genera efectes per moltes vies, de maneres molt senzilles o molt complicades, i aquests efectes poden ser de característiques molt distintes. És a dir, per primera vegada nosaltres tenim una tesi doctoral que demostra causalment l'efecte de l'activitat dels sectors culturals i creatius sobre la contaminació, o sobre l'esperança de vida, o sobre el preu de la vivenda, o sobre causals. És a dir, més o menys activitats culturals tenen efectes causals sobre aquestes variables socioeconòmiques. Així es complica la cosa i hem de tindre la capacitat de clarificar, és a dir, aquests valors que se generen fora del valor intrínsec de la cultura, qui té dret a apropiar-se-los, com s'apropien, com repartim i distribuïm. I estem un poquet com al principi de la revolució industrial, és a dir, en un moment on el valor que se genera a partir de la cultura no està clar qui té dret a apropiar-se-lo, perquè ja no ens val el model de la propietat intel·lectual, que ens ha servit durant alguns anys, i així n'hi ha coses que tenen a veure, és a dir, coses que haurien de pagar directament per els efectes externs l'hostaleria, per exemple. L'hostaleria hauria de pagar al sector cultural, especialment en aquest país. Hauria de finançar els sectors culturals. S'estan apropiant d'un valor econòmic sense cobrir els costos. Les cerveseres ho fan un poquet, però sols les cerveseres. Per tant, però estem parlant de la possibilitat d'utilitzar-lo a partir de la pròpia estructura sanitària. És a dir, i així estem en un moment de certa imprecisió al voltant de qui té dret d'apropiar-se, i algunes vegades hauria de ser el conjunt de la societat, perquè són béns comuns, s'hauria de repartir. És a dir, que hemos ingresado por él, pues repartimos 5 euros a cada un, que és el que li toca, perquè moltes vegades el valor de la cultura depèn, és un procés de construcció social. Les audiències estan determinant el valor de la cultura. És a dir, la participació en si mateixa està determinant el valor de la cultura. Per tant, si busquem una societat que distribuïsca adequadament els valors generats perquè ens interessa que es generen més, aquesta és una perspectiva molt economista, recompensar aquell que genera el valor, en alguns casos haurien de retornar a l'audiència, als que s'apunten a Spotify, part dels diners, no sols als creadors. Tenim un model convencional molt basat en aquesta sacralització de la creació, com si fos l'única generadora de valor, però la generació de valor en el camp cultural és un procés de construcció col·lectiva. A vegades està més centrada en l'activitat de la creació, a vegades està més centrada en l'activitat de la pròpia distribució, perquè no només n'hi ha que crear, n'hi ha que crear i que algú tingui accés. I això a vegades se genera a partir dels processos de canalització de l'obra creada. I on està el valor és en aquest procés de canalització. Per tant, estem en aquest moment, jo diria, de revolució, en termes de cert paral·lelisme a la revolució industrial, de que no està clar com redefinim els drets de propietat sobre el valor de la cultura. Ja no dic res més i li passo la paraula a Justin. Please.
Thank you. And I feel like I'm launching an iPhone with this on. Right, good. Well, I've gone a little bit sideways in my talk because I'm very conscious that this is a civic agora and leading up to Mondiacult, and we're going to hear about, I think, tomorrow the culture goal, the suggested goal for culture and the Sustainable Development Goals, and I wanted to really talk to that. Somebody in the organisation did a very nice summary of my article, and I learned a lot from them, actually. A very good summary. And basically I argue that culture is not an industry, that it's part of foundational social foundations, alongside health and education, etc. And you've spoken a lot about that just now. But one of the things I said in that paper was that there's a tendency when we talk of culture, cultural rights, to slide between culture as everything. You know, the anthropological idea of culture. Culture is in everything we do, in what we eat, in how we act, what we believe. And then the narrow view of culture, actually a very narrow view of culture as creative economy. And there's this flip-flop back and forward between culture is everything and then creative economy. And so that's what I said in the paper, and the paper took it to the local level. How do we think of that at the local level? And I think you've spoken to that. But I want to go the other way. I want to go global, if I can, and talk a bit about the Mondiacult and where we are with the Sustainable Development Goals. This idea of culture as a driver, an enabler of sustainable development at a global level, and we'll come back to some of those ideas we've just heard. The culture goal, I've seen the new culture goal, and I'm not going to spoil the effect by revealing anything in it. But I think what I would say is, like, not just this culture goal, but our conversations around it is an attempt to squeeze a very wide definition of culture into the narrow confines of a sustainable development goal with all its indicators and targets, etc. And we'll see in all the drafts of culture goals, some are very clear and actionable: mobility of artists, protecting the working conditions of artists and cultural workers, etc. Some are very, very broad, really, really broad, and I would say too broad. But there's always one little bit where it says, support the cultural and creative sector, support their dynamic diversity. But in that little box is a huge set of issues. In fact, I would say the main issues that are facing anybody in the cultural sector now, because it includes public and private, or public and commercial culture, analog and digital, production and consumption, art and entertainment. The full range of that cultural product is wrapped up in support the diversity of cultural and creative industries. And for me, this is a problem. So especially things where we say we must facilitate access to diversity of expressions in the digital environment. And if anybody knows what's happening now with big tech, AI, driven now by Trump's agenda, that's like a little man with a red flag standing in front of a turbocharged locomotive pouring down on us. You know, I think we've got 6 months in Europe, 6 months to keep American AI out, and it's still not clear that's going to happen. So there's huge questions there buried in a little line of an SDG, and this is my problem. So what I wanted to say is the Sustainable Development Goals are not an excuse to develop large-scale cultural aspirations. They're not an excuse for that. Now, of course, I understand why getting a culture goal would be important. It would restore the recognition and perhaps the funding, the resources given to an increasingly marginalised sector. So I get that, and it's an argument I've used. But I want to step back from that because we have to look around us. Now, there was you probably know, a well-known letter written, I think it was in March, by the USA, to the United Nations. And it said, although framed in neutral language, Agenda 2030 and the SDGs advance a program of soft global governance that is inconsistent with US sovereignty and adverse to the rights and interests of Americans. Therefore, the United States rejects and denounces the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and Goals, and it will no longer reaffirm them as a matter of course. So that is a pretty stark statement, and there's no sense of it changing. US aid, gone. America's contribution to UNESCO, gone. Many other, the UK, Germany, France are cutting aid budgets. All across the global north, aid is being cut. So what's clear is that when, certainly in 2022, the last Mondiacult, when it was like the death of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism's finished. There's new industrial strategies coming out of Washington, coming out of Europe, coming out of Beijing. But what followed the death of neoliberalism is something different. And William Davis wrote recently in the London Review of Books, he said, while Trump's first term looked like an aberration, a morbid symptom of a dying world, his second term looks more like an attempt to enforce a new paradigm. I think we have to take that very seriously. Now, what we could do, we could say, let's keep our heads down. You know, the winds will pass. Let's keep working at it, making the goals, pushing forward culture as a goal, and wait for sunnier days. Or even have a shadow goal. Let's start implementing it, even though it's not officially recognized. And I think we should really take a chance to think. And I'll see if I can get this. I don't want to take up too much time, but you know, Mondiacult 2022 advertised itself as the arc of history, starting in Mexico in 1982, 40 years in which culture sought to play a key role in sustainable development. But what strikes me now, looking realistically, is that that process does not begin with the rise of the global south, you know, the new international economic order, that pushback of the global south. It begins with its defeat. 1982 was the defeat of the global south in sustainable development. And all of us, UNESCO, the cultural sector generally, followed the Brundtland report. Yes, development can be sustainable if growth is linked to renewables. And if anybody's read the book by the French writer Frezos, More and More and More, you will realize that that's become clearly a myth. So culture's role for the last 40 years has been sustainable development, growth, plus emissions. But we will add culture and it will humanize this development. And a human development is more sustainable. And I think that's going to hit a wall now because we really have to look at it. And you know, in the 90s, I think UNESCO drove this very much out by the idea of culture as the soul of development, very much based on that idea. But already by 2000, it was driven by the cultural and creative industries. And as we say, you know, the creativity was not so much the new oil, but the new solar. It's endlessly renewable, and it will drive economic growth in the global south, and we'll all catch up. And I want to read a little bit about from Adam Tooze, the very well-known economic historian, writing a week ago or so. And he said the 1970s vision of a world unified under the rule of universal human rights went hand in hand with the discrediting of post-colonial development and its promise of national sovereignty. After the end of the Cold War, the ascent of universal human rights as a gold standard of international affairs went hand in hand with the enshrining of the unipolar hegemony of the United States. And Tooze adds, it was therefore anything other than coincidental that the recasting of global development in the key of human rights, which was the accomplishments of the SDGs, should have gone hand in hand with their stark depoliticization. The SDGs were an extraordinary reduction of the problem of development, which historically is organically linked to questions of collective agency and sovereignty. They were reduced to a matrix of key performance indicators. Up front were mosquito nets, primary education, gender relations. Nowhere to be seen were centuries of humiliation, unequal treaties, all those other things that shape the questions of inequality and poverty in the first place. Now, what he's saying there is something very, very strong, and it applies to what we've been doing in culture too, and we have to think very carefully about this, because the reduction of these kind of problems to metrics, if you like, the reduction of politics to metrics is one of the hallmarks of technocratic neoliberalism, and the SDGs are there in that. Again, it's a quote, that the SDGs accumulated vast sets of aspirational targets and technocratic ambitions, summarised in 17 goals, 169 targets. The hope was that politics and geopolitics could be transcended by the comprehensive grid of targets and colourful infographics. And I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, culture has fallen right into there. Have you looked at the UNESCO suite of targets and indicators? Hundreds of them. Hundreds of them. And, you know, there's going to the website, it's incredible. So what we've got the cultural sector completely depoliticised, captured by metrics, and we've got a plan to end global poverty by looking at a set of dashboards somewhere. So what we know is that development has not been sustainable. Emissions have gone up. The global south did not catch up. Most of it suffered premature deindustrialization, financially and technologically squeezed. But also, what's clear now is that it was never meant to catch up. In fact, the SDGs were broken not by their failure, people live with their failure, it's just targets, by their success, by China. Because once China got anywhere near the level of the US, the game was over. I'm not playing anymore. We're taking our WTOs and our rules-based order home. And that's why, of course, the SDGs, I think, are finished as a global game. And perhaps it's a good thing that they are. So I would like to just finish by what he says and as a challenge. This is Tuesday's finish. We're not in a world in which the future is mapped either in terms of universal norms or highly coloured SDG targets and cute infographics. The more primal and urgent imperative driving development, both at the individual and collective level, is not so much the quest for rights, but the will to power. Power over resources, purchasing power, the ability to resist the influence of others, to have security, but also, if possible, to assert one's zone of control. Development in this sense is not about ticking boxes and chasing targets. It's inherently a necessary political and geopolitical. So, you know, as I've got my tech bro hat on, you know, politics is back, baby. What is the cultural sector going to do about it? So, thank you.
I, Justin, tal com has plantejat la situació actual, la resposta, és a dir, la resposta o la crida a l'acció que fas, i la tornada a la política, quina hauria d'estar l'estratègia del sector cultural? És a dir, lluitar les grans batalles com, per exemple, provar o tractar de que els nous objectius de desenvolupament sostenible aparegui a la cultura o fer guerra de guerrilles en l'àmbit local, respectant espais de poder. Quina hauria de ser l'estratègia dels sectors culturals? Penses?
Well, I think the first thing is to decouple culture from sustainable development. It's clearly a failed belief. It's a failed ideology, and ultimately it attaches culture to growth. And we all know that the real problems with the idea of growth, certainly as it's presented in terms of GDP, and ultimately that's what the SDGs seek to do. So culture has to decouple from that. And I think it's also got to think about ways in which it can assert the foundational role of cultural rights, cultural infrastructure, without going through this charade of a set of SDG indicators. And that will mean real political alliances. The US is not going to do it, not for many years. It's got to be, we've got to think regionally, what can we do with alliances of states to really do basic cultural infrastructure for places that really need it? You know, the basic, at the basics. We need an alliance, regional alliance, I think should be led by Europe, but in alliance with the Global South against what's happening with AI and the tech platforms. That's going to be a political alliance. There's no way you can get some metrics to say, oh, that's bad, Elon. You know, they're coming after us. So we have to think politically about asserting the cultural rights, as we always have done in the past. So it's those kind of things. But to spend all our energy looking at culture goals or other kind of goals, and is it cross-cutting or is it singular? I think that's a distraction.
O sigui que la proposta seria, d'alguna manera, renunciar a aquest aspecte instrumental de la cultura per aconseguir altres objectius socials, econòmics, de qualsevol tipus, i tornar a aquesta essència al voltant dels drets culturals. Estaries d'acord en aquesta aproximació?
Yeah. Yes, I would say so. And you can develop your own objectives. China has its own little suite of SDGs, very material but very targeted. You know, let's begin to think, what does global cultural policy look like? What are its needs? What is really crucial now? And what's crucial, I think, is the supply of basic infrastructure. It is local cultural ecosystems surviving. It is taking back what I would call digital cultural sovereignty. And it is about real alliances between parts of the global north, hopefully parts of Europe, and the global south, proper alliances. You know, the International Fund for Cultural Diversity, and there's probably somebody who can correct me, I think about 3 years ago, it was something like $2 million. $2 million. That's a bonus for a Goldman Sachs executive. And that's for the world. So we have to start really thinking, what do we do now? And knowing that for a long time, who knows, hopefully 4 years, but maybe beyond, the US is not going to be part of this, and maybe even is against it.
Jo, si de cas, com Justin sol estar a l'altra part del globus terraqui, si aprofitarem els últims 5 minuts per si algú té l'ocasió de fer-li alguna pregunta especialment a ell, jo estic més a mà. Obrirem al públic per si algú vol fer alguna pregunta, algun comentari o algun...
Hello, everyone. My name is Oming. I am from Indonesia. Hi. Yeah, I actually work for this non-profit organization who focus on policy advocacy in culture in Indonesia. And actually, I've been reading your book about culture. It's not an industry, because in Indonesia, actually, what we push is for the government to see culture as a public good. And today, Indonesia actually has this law on advancement of culture that actually see culture as a public good and mandates the government to support arts and culture, whether arts bring or generate an income for the country. And this law actually mandates the government to build the cultural endowment fund for everyone to access it. But the challenge is because it involves many ministries, including Ministry of Finance. And even though the Ministry of Culture want to support any kind of culture, but the Ministry of Finance still use a number as an indicator, and it's still a huge challenge for us to convincing the Ministry of Finance that it's really important to support arts and culture. And what I want to ask, do you have a recommendation how to
solve it?
Yes.
Because
I mean, it's a classic case. Yeah. It's an absolute. But I mean, many of the Indonesia, Vietnam, other countries, very successful countries, have been told for 15 years that creative industries are going to drive their economy. They've been told that. And so, of course, they buy into that. And whereas, culture as a public good, as we've heard today from, is not the same as culture as a public good because it brings income into the country.
Nothing to do.
Yes.
There are very different questions.
Yes. Yeah. But yes, you have to...
Some more comment, the last one, or?
Yeah, very few comment only, not a question. I think that all what Justin is raising in a global context has to do also with a changing political economy in our new world now. And I remember very much in our current debate on culture policy in a global context, the end of the socialism and, of course, the end of the Cold War, which caused then in the development sector the SDGs, for example, if you follow the historic development of all of this. And I think that what artists after 1989 or 1990 raised as the loss of thinking about future in society. This is exactly that what Justin is writing or explaining in terms of what culture is today in a social or economic context in society. And we have what Heiner Müller, the famous German author, wrote already before the war was won, that we are in a preface of the loss of an idea of future and of an idea of society. So only a few comments coming from the very past.
Well, there's a very nice book by Jonathan White, and it's called In the Long Run, quote from Keynes, the economist. And what he says is this endless work with metrics to manage the near future with metrics stops you thinking about the long term, about the future. And I think that's where we've come to with culture. How many, the number of metrics and the targets, the suite of indicators, the monitoring reports, all these endlessly tumbling out. And we think if we keep doing that, we'll get there. But where's there? Where are we going? How do we think about the future? And at the moment, it's been swept aside by that focus on managed metrics. We're the experts. We can manage things. You just go out and do it. So.
Well, thank you, Justin. Is the time?
Oh, right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.